What is up, YouTube? Uncommon Ramen here. Before I get into the video, let me remind you, if you like my content, please hit that like and subscribe button. And also, if you want to be notified when the videos are posted, please hit the bell icon. And finally, if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all of this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. All right, today we are going to be taking a look at a Sisay Weatherlight Captain deck, but it's not really a Sisay Weatherlight Captain deck. If you guys have been playing for quite some time, especially if you're in the CEDH realms or pods of CEDH, you know that Sisay is a kill on sight commander. She is a commander identity with 5 colors in it, so she is capable of running basically everything. Her ability says that she gets +1/+1 for each color among legendary permanents you control, and for Wooburg, you can search your library for a legendary permanent card with a converted mana cost less than Sisay's power. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So she can basically search out a toolbox full of legendaries and find the one that's very good for whatever specific situation she's in and put that guy smack dab into play. And that just is a very powerful ability. I didn't want to run that because that's kind of also just an absolutely boring strategy. It is overplayed, and while I can see the merit for the strategy, like I said, it's kind of boring. So we are straying from that. We are going to do a deck that is completely inefficient and super fun to play either way. All right, today's Sisay deck is actually going to be a gates and shrines strategy. So the shrines that first got released in Champions of Kamigawa are legendary enchantments, which means she can find them. And since the release of Neon Dynasty, we actually have 6 new shrines from there, and there was 6 shrines from, I believe it was M19, so that's 12 on top of 5, so 17 shrines that we have available to us. And on top of that, because we are also doing gates, and originally there were 11 gates, if you include the Gateway Plaza, which is a terrible gate, but it's in here because it's a gate. When Battle for Baldur's Gate came out, we also got 9 more gates on top of that for a total of 20, and a legendary card that specifically looks for gates. So we have something that's specifically targetable by Sisay, so it's perfect. So we're going to take a look in here and just see basically the struggles here. We're trying to find ways to maximize the land potential. So we're going to see a lot of cards in here that either help us play extra lands, or help us color fix for lands, or help us get some extra value off of playing lands. You have to also remember that gates come into play tapped, so we have to have ways to make sure that we can use them as soon as we get them. So there's a couple ways to do that. We're also looking at a lot of enchantment synergies in here as well. So it's going to be like a mixed bag of craziness for her. We're going to start out with the creatures here. And I know I don't usually do this anymore, but this deck was already in order. And, well, it's a crazy deck to begin with. So, of course, we start with Azusa Lost But Seeking. 2 and a green, 1/2. It's a legend, so Sisay can search it up. You can play 2 additional lands each of your turns. This is a great way for a gate strategy to get out the gate really quickly. Especially on the first couple of turns, getting a couple of those down in a single turn is really good because, again, they come into play tapped. So if you don't have your cards that let them come to play untapped, this is really good at still pushing gates out there quicker than usual. Then we got Destiny Spinner, 1 and a green for a 2/3. Creature and enchantment spells you control can't be countered. So we're going to stop any kind of counter magic against us. For 3 and a green, target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is the number of enchantments you control. This is really powerful in this deck because we have quite a few enchantments that are going to be in play at any given time, and I can kind of guarantee that. There isn't a lot in the way when people are building decks that is specifically for mass enchantment hate. Usually it's spot removal, so it's going to be easy to keep these enchantments in play. Not to mention, she is also an enchantment. Then we have Dryad of the Elysian Grove. This one allows you to play an extra land and also color fixes your lands. It plays like a Chromatic Lantern. It's 2 and a green for a 2/4. It's not a legend, but it is an enchantment, so we get some of that enchantment synergy. We have Gate Colossus, which it gets cheaper to cast with gates in play, so equal to the number of gates you have in play. It cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, so it has a little bit of evasion. It's an 8/8 body, and if it's in your graveyard and you play a gate, you get to put it back on top of your library, so it's kind of got a slight bit of recursion. So it's just kind of a big monstrous meanie on the table. Then we have Gatebreaker Ram. This is a crazy card in this deck, especially now that there are 20 gates. For 2 and a green, you have a 2/2 that gets +1/+1 for each gate that you have in play. And if there's 2 or more gates in play, it gets Vigilance and Trample as well. So it becomes a horrible blocker, and it becomes a horrible attacker that your opponents have to deal with. And it's just a really great card in here. Then we have Gatekeeper Gargoyle. Gatekeeper Gargoyle is a good late game card. It's 3/3 with flying, but when it enters the battlefield, it gets a +1/+1 counter for each gate you control. So the more gates you have in play, the bigger this guy gets. Because it has flying, that makes this a huge problem. It doesn't matter that it starts out with 3/3 body, because 9 times out of 10, regardless of what happens, you are still likely to bring this out with as much bigger than a 3/3. Then we have the Neon Dynasty Kamigawa Shrine cycle. So we have Goshintai of Ancient Ways, which basically, for a 2/2 with first strike, when it becomes at the beginning of your end step, you can pay 1 to have it deal X damage to target player or planeswalker, where X is the number of shrines you control. We have Goshintai of Boundless Vigor. This is the same thing, except instead of dealing damage, you're going to pay 1 to give +1/+1 counter onto target shrine for each shrine you control. It is a 1/1 trample, but obviously with its own ability, it can become much bigger than that. We have Goshintai of Hidden Cruelty. Again, these are going to have the theme of at the beginning of your end step, pay 1. So in this case, you pay 1 to destroy target creature with toughness X or less, where X is the number of shrines you control. It's a 2/2 with Death Touch. Then we have Goshintai of Life's Origin. This is the Shrine Commander. Okay, this commander is this card is what you would use as your commander if you were just doing a Shrine enchantment strategy. And I could have used it, but I really liked Sisay for this. For a couple of reasons. We get to search up things like Tatyova. We get to search up things like Tuvasa. We get to search up a lot of very good legendaries in here, and she's really good at fixing situations that might be harder to fix because you're stuck with whatever cards are in your hand. So Goshintai of Life's Origin is a 3/4 for 4. You can pay Wooburg, so it's the same thing. You can have all 5 colors because this has a color identity of Wooburg. You can tap this to return target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is such an incredibly good ability in this because we're trying to keep our shrines in play. Or even if they get rid of some of the other enchantments in here, you can get those back. And then the best ability here is whenever this or any other non-token shrine enters the battlefield, you get to create a 1/1 colorless shrine enchantment creature token. So not only is it a shrine, but it's also an enchantment, so it synergizes with the enchantment strategy in here. It also counts as a shrine for when all these shrines are counting for shrines. These tokens actually count. It's kind of incredible. Not to mention it's a creature, so the Goshintai of Boundless Vigor can see that and pump it up. It's crazy. It's a very good card in this deck. Next up, we have Goshintai of Lost Wisdom. Again, it has that at the beginning of your end step thing. It is flying, and in this case, if you pay 1, you mill your opponents for X cards, or you mill target opponent for X cards, where X is the number of shrines you have. Then we have Goshintai of Shared Purpose, Vigilance 1/3. If you pay 1, you get to create a colorless spirit creature token for each shrine you control. And that's really powerful in here, and you'll see why when we get to our enchantments. But there's quite a few different cards in here that allow us to create these spirit tokens. You really want to take advantage of that. Next up, we have Hannah Ship's Navigator. So not only is she a legend, but she also, for 1, a white and a blue, can be tapped to return target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. So again, we're trying to get the recursion in all our enchantments. We're going to continuously recast enchantments that you may not want on the table, which is why you destroyed them in the first place. So Hannah Ship's Navigator is both a legend and also really good for the enchantment strategy. Next up, we have Joyra, Weatherlight Captain. Not only is she also a legend, whenever you cast a historic spell, you get to draw a card. And historic spells are artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. All of the shrines are legendary. So it sees every shrine that comes into play, and you get to draw a card from it. Not to mention all the enchantresses see them as enchantments, so they allow you to draw cards from them as well. So you have a really interesting amount of draw opportunities in this deck. Then we have Jukai Naturalist. This is basically in here because it reduces the cost of enchantments. Some of these shrines are actually kind of expensive. They get up to like 5 or 6, and that's kind of crazy. Especially if it's like one of the first enchantments that you play, or first shrines that you play. That can be kind of a really big downside. So discounts. Then we got Mesa Enchantress. Mesa Enchantress is the color opposite of Verdurn Enchantress. They have the exact same ability, exact same casting cost, except one is white and one is green. And basically what it is whenever you play an enchantment, you get to draw a card. Then we have Nine Fingers Keen. This was the guy who came from Battle for Baldur's Gate that specifically looks for gates. He is Menace for a 4/4 with Ward, pay 9 life. So if your opponents want to target him, they have to pay 9 life to do so. And that may not seem like a lot, but in Commander, that means you're going to target him a total of 4 times. That's it. And then you are going to be close to out of life. That's really incredible. When he deals combat damage, you get to look at the top 9 cards of your library. Pick one card, which is a shrine. It has to be a shrine. Or I'm sorry, a gate. So you pick a gate from among them, put that into play, and then you put the rest on the bottom of your library, unless you have 9 or more gates in play, at which point you get to keep all the cards that you looked at. That's a really great ability. Just even if we didn't get to keep the cards, just for getting gates into play, you get to look at the top 9, you get to pick a gate and put it into play, and that's super good for the strategy here. Then we have Sithis Harvest's Hand, another enchantress, except that when she sees an enchantress spell get played, an enchantment spell get played, you get to gain a life and then draw a card. So that's really good. We have Tatiova Benthic Druid. This is for land synergy. On landfall, you gain a life and get to draw a card. So it's like an enchantress except for lands. And we got Tuvasa the Sunlit. This is a limited enchantress. This one has I think it was Yavimaya Enchantress ability, where she gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control. And then she also has a very limited Enchantress ability, where on the first time you cast an enchantment spell, you get to draw a card. So you don't get to draw one every time, but at least once. Then we have Verdurn Enchantress, for the obvious reasons. Whenever you play an enchantment, you get to draw a card. Next up, we're going to look at instants, and we only have 5 instants in here. I had to sacrifice a lot of instant and sorcery spots so that we could get the enchantments that we needed in here, as well as making sure we had all the land strategies. So the enchantments have to be pretty decisive. So starting with Dovin's Veto, we're looking to counter spells that are going to target some of the strategies that we have going. Some of them, if they target enchantments, not a big deal because we have so much recursion for enchantments. But if they're going to target things like Sisay or some of the other things that we have less recursion for, then this is a great way to stop that. We also have Fierce Guardianship for the same reason. Fierce Guardianship just happens to be really incredible in general because it can be free if you have your commander in play. Right, next up we have Heroic Intervention. This is a great way to protect a very committed board from any kind of board wipes, and especially as it gets later in the game, your opponents are going to need to do something about you, so Heroic Intervention helps stop that. Then we have Path to Exile as well as Swords to Plowshares. Exiling creatures, and one allows them to look for a land, the other gives them life equal to the toughness. Just a way to get rid of big, horrible threats that maybe you can't deal with at that particular point in time. Next up, we are going to look at sorceries, and there are a little bit more sorceries in here, partially because we have a couple of ramp spells in here as well that were gate synergies, and I felt like they needed to be in here. So we have Circuitous Route. This lets you look for 2 basic lands or 2 gate cards. And that's really impressive, especially now that we have the Battle for Baldur's Gates cards. We can start actually searching out cards like Gond Gate, and Gond Gate allows your gates to come into play untapped, and that's really powerful. So this just lets you search for 2 gates and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Then we have Explore the Underdark, which is exactly the same thing. It does exactly the same thing, except it costs 1 more mana. And the reason behind that is because you also get to take the initiative. And when you take the initiative, you venture into the very first room immediately. And the very first room allows you to search your library for a basic land card. So essentially, Explore the Underdark allows you to search for 3 total lands for the cost of 5, which is pretty good, I would say. But 2 of those lands can be gates, and that's really incredible. Then we have Gates Ablaze. This is going to be one of the only board wipes in this deck. There are 2, I think, in total. This is one of them. Gates Ablaze is 2 in a red, and it deals X damage to each creature where X is the number of gates you control. The more gates you have, the more powerful this card gets. Then we have Kamal's Druidic Vow. This is super cool in this deck because it sees both lands and enchantments. So when you cast it, you're going to reveal the top X cards of your library, and you can put any number of lands and or legendary permanent cards with converted mana cost less X or less from among them onto the battlefield, and that is just super, super powerful in this deck. If it goes off, it will very much vault you ahead both in gates and in shrines. Then we have Primeval's Glorious Rebirth. Again, the shrines in here are all legendary. So if for some reason you get a huge board wipe that doesn't actually exile your cards, so your biggest enemy here is exiling. If you get exiled, then you're kind of screwed. But if you get a huge board wipe that doesn't exile, it takes out all your shrines, it takes out a bunch of your legends, Primeval's Glorious Rebirth just makes them happen again. Not to mention, I do not have Reliquary Tower in here, and I do have extremely powerful draw engines in here. So you're going to spend a lot of time discarding. It would be good to discard legendary permanents with the idea of reoccurring them with Primeval's Glorious Rebirth. Next up, we have Reshape the Earth. Reshape the Earth costs 9, but it is game ending. Okay, if you have Amulet of Vigor in play and you cast a Reshape the Earth, you can search for the remaining gates that you need as well as the maze to end the game, because they will enter the play tapped because of this ability, but because of the way Amulet of Vigor is written, you would just untap them and immediately activate Maze's End and win the game. So this is a game-winning spell. If this goes off, the game is over. Next up, we have Resurgent Belief. For the same reason that we have Primeval's Glorious Rebirth, the only difference being that this only sees enchantments. So we can bring all of our shrines back from our graveyard, and for that matter, all of our beneficial enchantments in general. Then we have Urza's Ruinous Blast. Urza's Ruinous Blast is yet another board wipe in here. It's the only other board wipe in here, and it is in here for obvious reasons. It does not target legendary permanents. Yes, that means that your opponent's commanders are going to be safe, and that means that if your opponents are running Legends Matter decks, that this isn't going to be nearly as effective. But what it does mean is it allows your shrines to live, and it allows your important legends to live, and everything else dies. Next up, we are taking a look at artifacts. Starting with the most important artifact in here, Amulet of Vigor. Whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped, and under your control, untap it. So that's really, really, really great with cards like Reshape the Earth or Circuitous Route or Explore the Underdark, things that allow your lands to come into play, but they come into play tapped. This forces them to untap, and that's really good. Next, we have Arcane Signet, just a rock for commander identity. We have Blackblade Reforged. This is legendary, which means Sisay can find it. And it gives +1/+1 for each land you control. And since we are playing a Gates deck where we want to put Gates out as quickly as possible, this can get really out of hand. Next, we have Chromatic Lantern. It is in here for color fixing. Means that now all your lands can tap to add any one color. You can also tap it itself to add any one color. Then we have Chromatic Orrery. Again, this is a legendary, so Sisay can find it, assuming that she has something like Blade of the Guild Pact or Blackblade Reforged, or some way she got more +1/+1 counters to allow her to search up this thing. You can spend mana as though it were mana of any color, so it doesn't matter what color the mana is when it hits your pool. You can tap it for 5 mana, and you can spend 5 and tap it to draw a card for each color among permanents you control. So that's up to 5 cards right there, 1 for 1. That's pretty good. Then we got Glaive of the Guild Pack. It's not legendary, but it is gate-centric. It gives +1/+0 for each gate you control, and it gives Vigilance and Menace, so something is going to be able to get in, or at least has a little bit of evasion to allow it to get in. We have Hero's Podium, another legendary that Sisay can see, and it gives each legendary creature you control +1/+1 for each other legendary creature in play, or that you control. So Sisay can get bigger just because of that, which means she can search up things like Chromatic Orrery. Not to mention for X and tapping this, you can look at the top X cards of your library, reveal a legendary creature card from among them, put it into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So it helps you seek out specific legends that you need to get into play. And anything that goes on the bottom of the library that's legendary, Sisay can just search up later anyway. So it's just another way to get legends in play, and it's an anthem for legends. Kind of a coat of arms. We have Mox Amber. It is legendary. Sisay can find that as soon as she comes into play if she wanted to. It's really important because you can spend the mana only on legends and planeswalkers. So, it's limited, but not in this deck. Well, it's limited still because you can't use it for the shrines, but you can use it for all the Goshintais. Then we have Shadow Spear. Shadow Spear is also legendary. It gives evasion in the form of trample. It gives lifelink +1/+1. But most importantly, for 1, you can remove hexproof or indestructible until end of turn. And that is insanely important. Next up, we have Soul Ring. 1 for 2, basically. And we have Swiftfoot Boots. Swiftfoot Boots gives hexproof and haste. And yes, I don't have Lightning Greaves in here. I can't remember why I didn't put it in here. I think there was reasons I needed to be able to target things. Or also, I just might not have had one. Or also, it might have just gotten cut for other reasons. All right. Next is enchantments, and it is definitely the meat besides the lands. There are quite a few enchantments. I had to sacrifice from quite a few different areas to get this to work. Starting with Crackling Perimeter. This goes up with we want to give our lands as much benefit as possible. You can tap an untapped gate you control to deal 1 damage to each opponent. So you could use this as a win con by just having this in play and every turn just passing your turn, and at the end of your turn tapping all your gates to deal X damage to everyone, and then untapping, passing your turn, and doing it again. It's just a really great way to deal a whole lot of incidental damage. Next, we have Enchantress Presence. Functions just like an Enchantress, cost the same as the 2 Enchantresses in here, and basically whenever you play an enchantment, you get to draw a card. Not to mention, it is an enchantment, so lots of recursion there. This is the reason that you want to play tons of spirit, or get tons of spirits in play. Hallowed Haunting. So the most important part here is the bottom text. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you get to create a white spirit cleric creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of spirits you control. Not number of spirit clerics you control, number of spirits you control. So there are 2 shrines in here that create spirits, and they create them equal to the number of shrines you control, which means that can get really big really fast, which means these guys can get really big really fast. Not to mention, as long as you control 7 or more enchantments, creatures you control have flying and vigilance. Once they get flying and vigilance, that kind of becomes a very, very scary problem for your opponents. And it's an enchantment. Next up, we have Hold the Gates. Creatures you control get +1 or +0/+1 for each gate you control and have vigilance. Again, we're giving vigilance, and then we're going to boost their toughness to make them incredible blockers. So we're not giving an inch to opponents as far as like especially aggressive decks. We want to try and make sure we're always available for blocking and that we're not losing things when we do so. Then we start getting into the shrines. We have Honden of Cleansing Fire, which gives you 2 life for each shrine at the beginning of your upkeep. We have Honden of Infinite Rage, which deals damage to target creature or player equal to the number of shrines you have each upkeep. We have Honden of Life's Web, which creates spirits, or 1/1 colorless spirit tokens for each shrine you have every upkeep. We have Honden of Night's Reach, which forces your opponents to discard cards equal to the number of shrines you have each upkeep. We have Honden of Seeing Winds, which allows you to draw cards equal to the number of shrines you have each upkeep. Then we have Paradox Haze, which allows you to have a second upkeep step. So we get a secondary proc of all of our shrines, which can be actually really disgusting to your opponents. The more shrines you have in play, especially the upkeep ones, the scarier this card gets. Next up, we have the Sanctums, another set of shrines. Sanctum of All, basically, let's see. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may search your library or graveyard for a shrine card and put that card onto the battlefield. So again, we're reoccurring from the graveyard. It has its own reoccur from the graveyard mechanic, and it's at the beginning of your upkeep that you get to do this. With Paradox Haze, that means you get to search out 2. You also can search your deck for them, so you just outright get to search your deck and put them into play, so that it's just better than Sisay in general. Not to mention, if an ability of another shrine you control triggers, while you control 6 or more shrines, that ability triggers an additional time. With Paradox Haze, that's going to be, let's see, 4 triggers of a single shrine each upkeep. That's just deadly. Next up, we have Sanctum of Calm Waters, another one that allows you to draw cards equal to the number of shrines in play, but if you do so, you also have to discard 1 card. Not a big problem in this deck. We have Sanctum of Fruitful Harvest. This is really good because this one at the beginning of your upkeep is going to give you X mana of any one color, where X is the number of shrines you have in play. And again, this is really good with like Kamal's Druidic Vow, because this allows you to really pump a whole lot of mana into it. We have Sanctum of Shattered Heights. This one's a little bit different because this one you can actually just forcibly trigger. For one, you can discard a land or shrine card, my bad, and have it deal X damage to target creature or planeswalker, where X is the number of shrines you have in play. This one isn't as effective as some of the other shrines because it doesn't hit players. And that is okay, because we can actually set this up so that it is a huge threat to your opponent, because they don't want to attack into something when you have the ability to just outright remove whatever they're attacking with. Then we have Sanctum of Stonefangs. This one is really messed up. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of shrines you have. As the game gets later, this just gets annoying. And it is each opponent, so you're not hitting a target, you're hitting all of the opponents at the table. And then finally, we have Sanctum of Tranquil Light. When you have Druid of the Elysian Grove, or you have Chromatic Lantern, or you have Chromatic Orrery, or any way of fixing your mana so that it doesn't matter what color mana it is, this card actually gets kind of disgusting. As long as you have 5 other shrines in play for each shrine you control. Actually, as long as you have 4 other shrines in play, because it sees itself, this ability only costs 1 white mana to cast, and it basically just taps target creature. So given the right situation, you could just outright tap whatever you want, if not everything on the table, creature-wise. Next up, we have Sigil of the Empty Throne. This just makes sense whenever an enchantment, whenever you play an enchantment spell, you get a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying. Again, we're playing an enchantment strategy. We're going to see a lot of 4/4 angels in play. When we give them vigilance, all of a sudden this just becomes really gross. Next up, we have Sphere of Safety, enchantment strategy. We're going to make it really difficult. In fact, if your opponents want to attack you, they have to pay X, where X is the number of enchantments you have in play. Per creature, by the way, per creature. And then finally, we have Sterling Grove. What's better than giving all of your enchantments Shroud? You can also use it as a tutor. It doesn't get Shroud itself, so your opponents can target this, but for one, you can sacrifice it and search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Oh no, reveal it, shuffle your library, then put this card on top. So it's a tutor. Now there's only one Planeswalker in here, and it's the obvious Planeswalker. We have Calyx, Destiny's Hand. Calyx has a +1 that looks for enchantments specifically, which is just really good for this deck. His -3 also turns all of your enchantments that you have in play into, what was the name of that? Oblivion Ring? Yeah, into Oblivion Rings. Or, you know, any numerous number of cards that did the same thing. It says creature or enchantment, so I guess it's not O-ring, but it definitely targets things on the table and removes them until some enchantment you control leaves the battlefield, and that's just incredible. And then his -7 returns all enchantments from the graveyard to the battlefield, which is again that major recursion that we're looking for. Next, we're going to take a look at lands. I did not separate basic lands from this because there are only 5 basic lands in here. There's one of each type in here. So we have Azorius Guildgate. It's a gate. We have Baldur's Gate. Baldur's Gate is not only a gate, but also is a cobble coffers for gates. You can tap 2 and it to add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of other gates that you control. It doesn't see itself, but neither does cobble coffers. So yeah, it's cobble coffers for gates. We have Basilisk Gate, which has a similar ability. It gives +X, where X is the number of gates you control, for 2 and tapping it. We have Black Dragon Gate, which is a color fixer gate, as opposed to having gates with pre-chosen 2 color combos. This one allows you to choose. Boros Guild Gate, Citadel Gate, another 2 color. Cliff Gate, another 2 color. Command Tower for fixing. Dimir Guildgate, Forest. Gateway Plaza. Big downside to Gateway Plaza is that when it enters the battlefield, you have to pay 1 for it, otherwise you have to sacrifice it. But it is a gate, and it's just good for the gate strategy. If you end up getting it, it sucks that you have to pay for it, but it does tap for any color. We got Golgari Guildgate. Then we have Gaunt Gate. So Gaunt Gate is probably the most important gate in here. It literally says gates you control enter the battlefield untapped, which means that you get to utilize them as soon as they enter battlefield. It turns what would be a normal dual-colored card that comes into play tapped, which is not so great, into something that's really incredible. And you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color of a gate you control could produce. We got Gruul Guildgate. Hall of Heliod's Generosity. Another way to reoccur enchantments. For 1 and a white, you can tap it to put target enchantment card from your graveyard on top of your library. Just make sure you get it back. We have Heapgate. Heapgate's interesting because you can actually filter in to it for a color. So if you're really having difficulties fixing colors, which I have been in that situation before, but you can also tap 1, tap it, and another untapped gate you control to create a treasure token. And that's not like super good, but if you're holding up mana and you didn't end up having to use it, you can actually dump it into here for treasure tokens, and that's not actually a bad thing. Next we have Indotha Triumph. We're going to have all of the original Ikoria Triumphs. We're not going to have any of the other Triumphs, partially because they weren't out during the time, and partially because I can't fit them in here. There just isn't space for them without taking out the basic lands, and you kind of just need those basic lands. So we've got Indotha Triumph. Island. Izzet Guildgate. We got Ketria Triumph. We got Manor Gate, another double. We got Maze's End, so this is the win con for gates. Enters the battlefield tapped, so you need Amulet of Vigor for it to be an instant one with Reshape the Earth. Taps for colorless, or you can tap 3 and it to return it to your hand, search your library for a gate, and then if you have 10 or more gates in play, win the game. We have Minamo, sorry. School at Water's Edge. You can tap a blue and tap it to untap a legendary permanent you control. This is a good way to bring up a blocker, but it's also a good way to untap the Ghost Shintai of Life's Origin if you used its Wooburg ability. I don't know what else in here taps, but it's just a way to untap a legend. You could also use it to untap your Mox Amber or Legendary Land. Mountain, Orzhov Guildgate, Plains, Rakdos Guildgate, Ragran Triome, Sisay Triome. We got Seagate, another duel, Selesnya Guildgate, Simic Guildgate. We got Urza's Saga. Urza's Saga is in here for the obvious reason of getting the amulet. Yes, the other abilities are good. We need those, especially early game. If you get this like first turn, you're going to need that extra mana, so on and so forth. You can get that Construct. Who knows? But the real part here is searching a library for an artifact card with mana cost 0 or 1 and putting it onto the battlefield, because that immediately fetches out your Amulet of Vigor. Now, if you already have Amulet of Vigor in your hand, or you already have it in play, that still has 2 targets in there. You still have the Shadow Spear, and you still have the Soul Ring to look for. And yeah, if you have to go for the Soul Ring, that's kind of like, it doesn't seem like it's good, but it does have its good points to it. So, it still has targets outside of Amulet of Vigor. And then finally, we have Zagoth Triumph. So you can see in here, we only had enough room for 1 of each basic. That isn't actually as bad as it seems. 5-color decks tend to be that way. You either run 1 of each basic or 2 of each basic, not much more beyond that. But we wanted to fit all of the 20 gates that are available in here, and then have a few utility lands in here that are super good for the synergy in this. Minamo being one of those, Urza's Saga also. So that is the Sisay Gates and Shrines deck. It's not strapped as thin as you would think it would be, considering that it's 2 strategies, because neither strategy takes away from the synergy of the other one. The gates can kind of work on their own, and there's enough spots in there to have things that look for gates or things that see gates and get benefits from them, without taking away from the whole strategy of the enchantment side of things. Plus, the enchantment side of things has some stuff in there that helps synergize with certain parts of the gate strategies. We have the Sterling Grove in there that's specifically in there to help cover our shrines, but also in the process covers Crackling Perimeter and Hold the Gates. You know, so there's having the 2 strategies doesn't seem to cause any conflict between the 2 of them, except causing you to think more about what you want to do each turn. So that is it, guys. That is Sisay, Weatherlight Captain, Gates, and Shrines. I call it sightseeing because she's seeing all the gates and the shrines. And yeah, until next time. Or actually, if you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. But let's keep it positive. I'll remove any negative comments. And until next time, guys. Peace.